Hi, Greg Hughes again, and this is part 2 of building a web page with layout grids. This is where we left off in video 1. We used 2 layout grids, single celled, single column, and now we're going to continue down the page and add some more layout grids. To do that, of course, I just go to the toolbox. Let me move the camera over so you can see what I'm doing. Go into the toolbox and I'm grabbing under layout, a layout grid. Click on it, draw a box, and there we go. Once again, I'm going to use a single celled or single column layout grid. So we remove this and click OK. The other thing I'm going to do in this particular grid is I'm going to make it have a background color. Not a background image like this one, but let's add a background color to this grid. So I double click on it, go to the Style tab, and we'll pick a solid color. And we'll keep using that same blue. Click OK. Now we have a solid blue layout grid. The contents I want in this layout grid is a couple of pieces of text, but special text. We're actually going to use header text, header 1 text, and header 2 text. I'll show you what I mean. I've already made some, so I'm just going to paste them here. These are 2 different text objects. This one, if we double click on it, you can see is a heading text. In the toolbox, that looks like this. It's this heading text object. A little different than a text object because it has some special code in it called an H1 tag or an H2 tag that Google sees when it crawls your website. Kind of important. So if we double click on it, you can see this is where I put the word. This is, in this case, this is an H2 tag. H1 is the bigger one, but we'll use an H2 tag here. And let's see, we've got another one. And by the way, we've already aligned it, center. And we've got another one here. Same idea, only this will be our H1 tag that we've centered. And so now what we're just going to drag these in here. And one of the things I want to point out is it's important that we drag them in the right order because this is a layout grid. It's going to automatically snap everything into place. So if I put the how do I do what I do here first, and then I put the services in after it. And by the way, I don't have to position it in any special place. I just have to get it in the grid somewhere. The grid will take care of it, and it will snap services right under this. Well, that's a problem because what if I wanted services on top of how do I do what I do? I can't just drag it around. What I have to do is I have to put them in a different order. So what I'm going to do is take this one out again and then put it back in. By putting it in a second time, it goes into the second position. Also, it's a terrible color. Let's change it to white. The text is going to be white. We can see it a lot better. Let's do that with this one too. Double clicking on services. Style, text color should be white, and now we can see it in our dark blue background. Now again, I've got a padding issue. I don't want these so close to the edge. I want this blue box to be bigger. I don't want it to be just the exact same height as my text. So I just add some padding. So I'm going to click on the grid itself, and let's add some padding of about 25, and you can experiment. If you need more or less, you can do that, obviously. That's about right. Time to make another one. Select the grid itself, do a copy and do a paste, and it's going to snap right into place. I don't need these objects in here though. I just want this same kind of grid, same color. However, I don't want to use a single cell this time. I'm going to double click on this grid and let's add some columns. I want this to be 4 columns. So let's add one. Let's add a second or third one rather, and let's add the 4th one. We also need them to be evenly spaced. So I'm going to need to drag the bar over here. Since the total needs to be 12. These should all be 3 units wide. So now all we've done is we've made another grid from the other one. It's got no content in it except that it's got 4 columns. It has that padding because it's a copy of the other one. Let's click OK. Now the content I want to put in here, just to save time, I've already made. So let me paste one here on the page here. It's actually a couple of objects. I'm going to snap them into the grid. What I've done is I created a font awesome icon, which is what this is, and I created a text object, and I want them to be in this grid. I've made a few of them here. However, just to demonstrate what I just said, I don't want them in this order, and I certainly want them centered. I need to do this again. What I'm going to do is I can take out the text so that the font awesome will go to the top, drag it back in, and now the text is below it. That's how you can arrange or rearrange things inside a grid. Since you don't have the ability to drag them around into place, you have to make them exit and then come back in the order in which they will be stacked. The other thing I want is I want this to be centered. But before we do that, let's go get the rest of my content. Okay, through the magic of video editing, I made a bunch of them ahead of time so I wouldn't bore you with those details. Basically what I have here are just font awesome icons and some text objects. But let's dissect them a little bit and see what we're working with. So first let's talk about the padding, which I've actually done around the text objects themselves. Instead of creating padding around the cell this time or around the grid, I did it with the text object. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on this text object and go to Object Properties and show you what I did. For this particular text object, I created padding of 25 for the top of the object and then 25 for the bottom. I don't really need it on the side, so I left that alone. So each one of these text objects has that kind of padding. And I did the same, of course, with these. They're basically copies of one. And what about centering this? How do we do that? Well, here's how I did it. First of all, let's double click on the grid itself. Here we're looking at the settings for the whole layout grid. This is the whole layout grid. And the layout grid is actually set to justify to the left, not center. I want these to center. But remember, we now have multiple columns, so we have more things to edit. This page usually refers to the entire grid itself. We can also edit each particular cell by selecting it. So if I select this cell, I can actually change this cell to be centered. Let's do that and click OK. Watch what happens. The contents in this cell is now centered. So I actually can control each one of these independently. Let's do that again. I'm going to double click on the grid itself. And again, if I select this cell, you can see it's centered. This one is not. So I'll need to center that one, center this one, and center this one. Also, if I wanted to dig deeper into each one of these cells, they each have their own settings. For example, if I wanted to add padding just to this cell, not to the grid itself, this is the whole grid padding. If I want to add padding just to this particular cell, I can either double click on it or click Edit, and I'm actually editing the padding of this cell alone. Now in this case, I don't need to because I've already got enough padding for the whole grid. But just so you know, each one of these has their own padding settings. And now each one of them is centered. So let's click OK, and we can see how everything did center. All right, so now we have another nice little section, 2 layout grids, this one with a 4-column setting. Let's move on. This time I'm going to make another layout grid. So I'll go get my tool here under Layout, grab a layout grid, draw a box. Again, it snaps into place down here. Time to move the camera down a little bit so we can see better. Once again, I only want one cell, so I'm going to remove this one. Click OK. Now what I want to do with this one is I want to put another image in the background. Remember with the top one, I had this big image and I was very particular about how it showed because I wanted to see the whole office and I wanted this white ceiling so that my words would appear better and kind of wanted to see this guy working at the desk. I was really particular about how much of this image showed. But sometimes you might just use a background that's more of a texture or an abstract work of art. I don't really care if the whole thing shows. I just want to give some sense of texture. So what I'm going to do is double click on it and add an image, go to the Style tab, go to, let's see, my image. I want to go find this image. And it's kind of this funky style here. There we go. Now, I want it to show more than that, but I don't really care if we show the whole image because it's just a pattern. So I don't need it to fill the page. I just want it to fill a little more than this. First of all, we should add some content to this. And again, to save time, I've already made some. So let's see what we've got here. So this is another heading. We'll put that in there and let's put a button in there that I made. There we go. But I got a lot of work to do, as you can see. First of all, let's center everything. So we're going to double click and let's just center the whole thing. And it's still not quite right because I don't like the color of this text. And also I still need some padding. I want this to show more of the texture, more of the background, and I don't want this to hug the edge. So let's start by adding some padding here. Let's add maybe 50 pixels. And again, you can experiment depending on the picture you're using and how big you want this to be. There, I like it like that. The other thing I can do is I want to make sure that it shows at least a certain amount of this picture, like 50% of it. So let's try that trick. I'm going to go like this, and instead of saying auto, let's make sure we go at least 50 vertical and horizontal. Now watch what happens. Okay, I'm getting closer. The 50 pixel padding really helped, but I really don't like the way this looks. I can either change this to white text like I did up here, but I'm using an awful lot of white text. Let's do something to mix it up a little bit. One of the things I can do, and this is a great trick too, is I can actually lighten this background. I really like the colors I'm using, but what if I was to lighten the background? Here's a way to do that. Let's double click on the grid. We're going to go to the Style tab. Now I know that I chose an image and I have this image here. I could have also just put a solid color, or I can do this trick and do a little bit of both. I could use an image plus what's called an overlay. That is this color, or any color I want, I'll stick with white, as an overlay. I also have some control over how this overlay looks. First of all, let's see what happens when I click OK. Well, that's not what I want, because I overlaid white over my image completely and you can't see the image at all. I want that overlay to be sort of transparent. That's called an alpha setting. So let's go look at it again. I'm going to go to the Style tab, and I'm going to go to the image overlay. Color I chose was white. Here's my alpha setting. Let's turn this down by dragging this. Oh, let's just make something up. How about around 100? Well, 98, close enough. Okay, we're going to click OK. And now you can see what's happened is I've lightened this purplish background, because it's as if I've laid a piece of transparent or semi-transparent plastic or whatever over the top of this color that's kind of whitish. I can control how white this is by its opacity, and that's what that alpha setting is. So that's just another trick for using backgrounds. I've combined an image with a color and that alpha transparency to get the effect that I really want. Okay, so let's move on. I'm going to add another grid here, and it's one I already made just to save time. Basically the same thing we've been doing. This is a layout grid that's got a couple of pieces of text in it. You can see there's some padding around it. If you double click, you'll see what I did. 25 pixels of padding. Pretty straightforward. This is just a simple grid with text. Let's do another one. Another one I pre-made to save time, but let's talk about what I did here. This one's a little more exciting. This time I made a 2-column grid. As you can see, there's 2 cells here. If we double click on it, you can see what I've got. 6 and 6 is 12. There's 2 of them, evenly spaced. I've got padding for the whole grid at about 25 pixels, both top and bottom. So you're familiar with that. That's pretty common. Do that a lot. And then I put some content in here. In this case, I just simply drug an image in here. So that means I grabbed my image tool like this. I drug it out onto the canvas. I found my image. And then once I found my image, I drug it into this cell. So it was out here like this. I drug it in and it snaps into place. However, this is probably not what you're thinking. This looks like a text object, but it's not. This is a single object called a card. Because cards are great to use with layout grids, they are in and of themselves responsive. And so using a card in a layout grid is really a good idea. I'm going to double click on this card and show you what it looks like. These are the settings for the card. I have a text object, another text object, and then a button. If you want to know more about cards, I actually have a video that talks just about how to build cards, but they're pretty simple. You can add types down here by simply clicking the add button, and then you choose what kind of object you want. And these are what you have to choose from: buttons, dividers, footers, and headers, even images and text. In this case, it's a very simple card. I just have text here. If you edit this, you can see it's actually an H2 text, a heading text, the color I want, the size I want, all of that. This is a little bit different. This one's a little bit smaller, but it's just regular text. And then this object is a button that says view this project, and then I could link it to whatever I want to link it to. All I've done is I've made a grid, 2 columns, put an image in here, put a card in here, and now I have a nice looking layout. Let me press F5 and let's see where we are so far. Here's our nice website. I'm going to move the camera up so we can get a little bit better view here. There we go. And let's scroll down. So this was our header, and then here was our next layout grid. And then these were the Font Awesome grids, the 4-column. And then look, there's my big layout grid. Notice it looks different when we preview. That's something we need to consider. So this might be too big for me. I might have to go back and fix that. Always preview your work as you go. And then here's my recent projects and the card grid that I made here. Starting to look pretty good. So let's go adjust this. I think this is too much space for what I want to do. So I'm going to close the preview, and let's go see what we can do to change this. So let's double click on it and go back to that Style tab where we're dealing with our image. One of the things I didn't do is I didn't choose the size. Again, I could go back to that cover effect, and that may just accomplish what I need right there. So let's click on cover, click OK. Yeah, you see that it adjusted. This time it's going to fit a little bit better. Let's go F5. See what that does. I'm going to scroll down the page. I do like the way that looks better. I still have too much space, so I might want to get rid of some of my padding, so I'll do that too. This time I'll get rid of the bottom padding. I don't think I need all that. And see what that does. Part of design is just trial and error and experimenting with these numbers to see what happens. So that's what we're doing. Aha, something went wrong. So it seems. I just took away all this padding and yet it's still showing. Why is that? Well, I'll show you why. If we close this up and go back in here, remember I told the grid to show 50% no matter what. So that I might want to take off. If we go with auto and then go back to padding, let's see what happens. Clicking F5 so I can preview. And now I got what I want. So what I had done was I had combined that 50 VH along with 50 pixels of padding and it added too much. So that was the fix. Just take that out. Now I have exactly what I want. All right, so let's close this and let's move on. Let's make a bunch of these. I'm going to copy paste some of these and I'll edit the video so you don't have to sit through all of that. But before I do, what I think I'm going to do is put a little divider between these. So I'm actually pasting in a grid that's very simple. It's a single column grid with no padding. It doesn't need any in this case. It's just everything is by default. And the only object, the only content I'm putting in is this object that's called a line. If you look in the toolbox, the line tool looks like this right here. It's called horizontal line. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make some copies of all this and let's fill out the page. There we go. So now I'm really starting to fill out my page. So much so that it's getting kind of long to deal with because now I've got all these grids. I've put in some dividers in between these things, as you can see. As my page gets kind of long, I think I'm going to add another little trick here along the side here. It doesn't have anything to do with grids, but it is a really nice trick that you're going to want to use on your websites. So let's just do it really quick. I'm going to go get one and I'll show you how it works. All right, so what I've done is I've created a little layer called a sticky layer. A sticky layer is a layer that you can use with layout grids. And the reason why you can use this kind of a layer with layout grids and not a standard layer is because you can control where this sticks. I'm going to tell this layer, and I'm telling it here, and by the way, this is how I chose sticky layer, that I want it to always be on the bottom right, and I want it to be offset on the corner by 11 pixels. This will make more sense when we preview, but this is what this layer does. And also it's a little bit opaque. It's not fully 100% opaque. It's a little bit transparent, I should say. And so we're going to just leave this sticky layer as it is to always be in the corner of the page. Now inside this layer, I actually have an object here. This is an up arrow. Double click on it. And it is, of course, a Font Awesome icon called Angle Up. And I put that tiny little Font Awesome inside my layer. And I ended up making one of those little buttons that you can click on and it pulls you to the top of the page. Let's see how that looks. I'm going to go F5. And now as we look at the page, and I'm going to bring this in here to the camera, bringing the page up into the camera view so you can see down in my corner here, I have a sticky layer. It's always going to be in that bottom corner because that's where we set it as a sticky layer. We set 11 pixels in, 11 pixels up, and it's always going to be there no matter where the browser is, up or down. If we move the browser in, our sticky layer is going to stick, and we have this little layer. Now, how do we make it do what we want it to do? Well, we're going to have to go program it, but this is at least how it looks, no matter where we are on the page. Even as we scroll down, whoops, let me do this so you can see it. Even as we scroll down, it sticks to that bottom corner. It's a sticky layer. That's what sticky layers do. Really handy for when you want to drive the user back up to the top of the page. But how do we do that? Here's how we do it. First thing you should know is the top of my page, there is this object here that you'll remember from the first video is a grid. This grid has a name called Layout Grid 1. How do I know that? Well, if we go down into the properties, I've selected Layout Grid 1. You can see that the ID here says Layout Grid 1. I'm going to change the name though to something that I can remember easier, like Home. This will be our home grid, the one at the top. So let's call it Home. What you should know is every object on the page can behave like an anchor or a bookmark. We used to have to use these little things here called bookmarks that we could link things to on the same page. If you wanted to click a button and go to another part of the page, you used to have to put a little anchor on the page. But now, because technology has changed and HTML has changed, we can actually make anything be an anchor or a bookmark. And so this object, this layout grid, is in and of itself automatically a bookmark. And now it's a bookmark called Home because that's what I just named it. So here's what we want to do. We want to double click on our little Font Awesome icon and we want to link it to Home. I'm going to go click And here you can see I've linked it to a bookmark called Home. All of the objects on my page have names or IDs. These are the ones that they are by default. I changed this to Home so I could find it easier in the list. By doing this, every time someone clicks on this link, it's going to take them to the layer called Home at the top of the page. Let's go try it. Clicking F5. Let's bring it into view here. So now I'm scrolling down the page. I need to make this browser a little bit shorter so you can see it. I'm scrolling down the page, and all of a sudden I want to go back to the top. Well, since this links to something called Home, an anchor or a bookmark called Home, we click it, it goes right back up there. It just snaps there. Now, if we wanted it to look a little better, rather than just snap back up to the top like it does, we can do something called smooth scroll. So let's go add that too. How do we make it smooth scroll when we click this button? Well, smooth scroll is a setting for a bookmark. Well, where's our bookmark? Remember, we don't have to use them anymore. Now we can link to the layout grid. Well, since the layout grid is our bookmark, if you double click on it, you'll see it actually has a bookmark tab, as you'll find many things on the page do. So we're going to click on this. We're going to say smooth scroll it. We can control how it scrolls, but we'll leave the default because it's pretty nice. All I'm doing is checking this box and I'm saying use the layout grid as a bookmark, make sure it's got smooth scroll, and now we've got this great effect. Watch what happens. We'll click F5. We'll bring the browser back into the camera view. And as you can see, we're scrolling down the page, but anytime we hit our Font Awesome icon, boom, we go back up, but we go back in a smooth scroll fashion. Now, I realize that wasn't part of working with layout grids, but this is just a really common thing to do, and it's a really easy thing to do to add a lot of finesse to your page. So what we have now so far in our little project is a great header. We're using layout grids to do all kinds of things here, break up our page, and I think we're almost done to finish up this page. In the next video, we'll finish it off, and we'll even add a photo gallery.